Okay, we might kick things off. If you want to grab a coffee and grab a seat. So thanks to everybody joining online as well. We've got a packed session today, so we'll kick things off. And so again, just like to welcome everybody here. We're going to be talking about enhancing biodiversity on solar farms. So my name's Eric Nordberg. I'm a senior lecturer at UNE, focusing on landscape management and applied ecology. And a lot of my work revolves around the deployment of renewables, especially solar. And I'm interested in how we can use those spaces as multi landscapes. So can we have biodiversity? Can we have farming? Can we have energy production? All those things on the same land. And so we'll hear from a variety of speakers today, and we'll have a little panel where we can do some Q&A. We've got different organizations here, so academic researchers, landholders, government agencies, NGOs. We tried to pool a variety of different people with different perspectives, and we'll try and just kind of lead some general discussion from the panel, and we'll open it up to questions as well. So you'll notice that on your tables, there's a little table mic. It should have a red dot glowing at the moment. That just means you're muted, so we don't get a whole lot of background noise. And so if you have a question, just push the button on top there. It should turn green, and that will make your mic live. So we'll also have some roving mics that we can be passing around as well. Oh yes, and if you're online, please feel free to use the Q&A function. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A panel. You can type in your questions there, and we'll have some of our team moderating those questions as well. So feel free to enter those as we go. I've gotten apologies from Uncle Steve Ahoy, who was going to come and be on our panel and talk about cultural heritage and how that integrates into solar. He's going to do our welcome to country, but he's stuck in the field at the moment, so apologies from him. So I'd just like to start with an acknowledgement of country and acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of the Anawan people, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. To kick things off, we'll have a couple of different speakers. And we've shuffled things a little bit around so that we can coordinate with people's availability. We know that everybody's busy. And so unless Heidi has any extra announcements at this stage, I might see if Liz Smith is online. Liz, if you're on and can unmute yourself, just check our screen here. Oh, I can see you, yes. Can you unmute?
Hi, sorry.
Oh, no, excellent. That's all good. I will just unshare my screen so that you can.
No problem.
So Liz is going to talk to us a little bit about the Agri-Solar CRC and basically what that's made up of, give you a brief overview. So that should really lead into some of the discussions you'll hear later on about how we can use these large-scale landscapes for multiple purposes. And so Liz is also running a workshop later today, and so she was able to squeeze us in for a few minutes. So I'll pass it over to Liz, and feel free to type in questions on your Q&A form as well. So over to you, Liz. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric, for having me online today and for squeezing me in. I'm zooming into you from Noosa today. I'm actually attending the Noosa Power and Energy Conference. So we've heard from Matt Keane this morning and had various speakers around how solar is really going to play this incredible role in the transition that's happening for our country. And I'm looking forward to my panel where I get to talk a bit about the economic opportunity that we will be able to pursue. For those of you who may not be familiar with what a cooperative research centre is, that's okay. I'll leave Eric and the really qualified team at UNE to fill in those gaps if you're not familiar. But to my understanding, having never led a bid before, this being our first shot at the apple or bite of the cherry, a cooperative research centre is exactly what it stands for. So a cooperative group of industry, research and government organisations that link together in order to conduct research and development that is tasked with a mandate to solve an industry challenge. The challenge that we have before us in this country is a particularly politically volatile and tricky to navigate toxic debate around the adoption of renewable energy, particularly solar, in our agricultural lands, whatever class of prime or marginal activity they may be. You might have seen a recent snapshot of this debate on Landline a couple of weeks ago. I really encourage you to go and watch the 10-minute video. The Cooperative Research Centre receives a bit of a plug at the end, but you can hear directly from landholders and real experts in this space as to what is needed to move this forward. So I thought I'd give us a little bit of an update as to what we have submitted, knowing that the University of New England, the Community Power Agency based in Armidale, and I think I can see Heidi on the screen there. Yes, there she is. And ACEN Renewables in the Armidale region have come in as one of the 64, as 64 partners in our consortium. So we submitted a large application to the federal government on the 25th of April this year, requesting $40 million worth of Commonwealth funding over 10 years to be spread across our industry partners in order to fund essential research and development that can really bring what we call agri-solar to fruition as a sovereign-made sector in our country. When we're talking about agri-solar, we're talking about all uses of solar energy production in agricultural landscapes, so including behind the meter on any type of farm, as well as embedding all types of agricultural production and what may come from that in utility scale photovoltaic concepts and contexts. What that means for Eric's work and those of you really interested in the biodiversity sphere is that we have a dedicated component of one of our research programs that will be looking at utility scale projects and how we can actually embed better biodiversity on farms. And then ultimately the vision in 10 years would be to come up with some kind of credit or certification or a different process whereby we can encourage industry to be doing the best possible caregiving of the land on which we walk and tread every day. So we are awaiting the outcome of our stage 1 submission for this centre. If we progress to stage 2, we do have a small window in which we can welcome new partners to the consortium. So please reach out if you have an interest in being involved in this work and partnering with the University of New England to do more amazing work. There is a bit of a bang for your buck involved if you join via tax incentives as well as match funding from the CRC if we get funded. So there's certainly a lot in it for you economically. And I guess the last little thing that I'll touch on, because I don't want to take up too much time at all of your important session while you drill down to such important research, is that what we embedded in the bid is a strong economic, prosperous ability for this CRC to create a sovereign-made agri-solar sector in our country. We understand on the basis of modelling that was completed for us by the CSIRO that we could reach per year $2.3 billion of production in agri-solar sites across our country. Now, that's a very small proportion of the agriculture industry, but it's an important one. Because it would be the farmers and agricultural businesses and their aligned partners that would be the ones that benefit from that investment, as well as the energy partners that come in to support them. So I might leave it there. I do have a larger pack and I'm happy to take any questions if people have curiosities, but I don't want to get in the way of such an excellent session that you got organised today. So thank you for squeezing me in.
Excellent. Thanks, Liz. Before we open up to questions, I guess I'll just set the scene a little bit as well with the CRC. Liz has done an amazing job pulling together a whole bunch of different groups. As you can imagine, there's 64 partners. That includes universities all across the country, different solar companies, community groups. And so it's a monumental task. And I think this application kind of stands on its own in that we've brought together lots of people with interests, and again, varied backgrounds as well. So there are groups that are interested in the engineering and the panel construction and the efficiency. We've got people interested in can we grow crops under panels, how it impacts vegetation and land management, biodiversity, community groups, and things like that. So this covers a really big space, which is great because a lot of the questions that we hear about large-scale solar is, it does take up a lot of land, and they're kind of acting as new ecosystems. And so we can do potentially lots of things in that area, which is really important. And so in order to get a holistic understanding of how these new systems work, we need people from lots of different areas, different angles, different expertise, to help facilitate all that knowledge and that data coming in so that we can inform how best to manage these sites. So congrats to Liz and her team. Well done pulling all those people together. And yeah, fingers crossed for phase 2. So we'll open up to questions for Liz before she has to jump off to her next meeting. If anybody has a question, feel free again to unmute your table mic and ask. And same goes with online if you want to unmute or might check our chats here.
I don't think there's anything in there.
Yep, excellent. Hopefully we've got our sound fixed. Yep, good.
Can I ask you a
Okay.
question?
Sure, yeah, Melanie, if you can go for it.
Can you tell me whether there's any component of education and training per se,
Yes.
as in coursework in the AgriSolar bid?
Coursework is a separate question, but in every cooperative research centre, it's actually compulsory to have a education and training program. So we will have a industry PhD program, which will fund PhD scholarships embedded in industry, which will be fantastic. I look forward to seeing what's going to be possible from the next generation of young researchers, having done a PhD in ancient history at a department that no longer exists. I fully support following your passions and your interests. So please apply if we get to that point. But the other special component that we intend to embed in the CRC is a work integrated learning program. And that will be in partnership with Economy, who have come in an in-kind way of support. That kind of sets us apart from other CRCs that don't necessarily do work integrated learning at the undergraduate or postgraduate levels, but we've adopted a really strong place-based approach to how we've engaged our landholders and partners in this CRC, and creating more opportunities for young people in rural and regional economic areas is something that's very close to my heart. Having worked in a work integrated learning program in Far East Gippsland in Orbost, it's a town of 2,000 people. Do look it up, but I can see the value in what work integrated learning can offer. So we will have a program to that effect. As to whether coursework develops out of it, that would be something that comes from our individual university research organisations, whether they decide to embed something, but it'd be great to see. You never know.
Oh, just
Yep.
my question was just how do we
Just wondering if you have what sort of agricultural partners, any agricultural industry organisations involved, or
Are you referring to peak bodies or RDCs or individual producers?
peak bodies, MLA, or any of those?
So our key peak body, we don't have any RDCs formally partnering in the bid just yet. We've got some fish dangling, excuse the pun, but MLA have not been necessarily interested. Really happy to keep chatting though. We had lengthy conversations with AgriFutures as to whether they were going to come in as a partner, but instead we have the next best option, which is their senior commercialization manager as one of our independent board directors, who will be steering the ship in good stead. And Farmers for Climate Action have been the industry proponent for this bid for a long amount of time before I even came on the scene. So there's certainly representation. They have 8,000 members. So we're well and truly supported by individual farming proponents, and we have engaged individual producers and landholders in the CRC as full members, so at their own at an in-kind basis, but they still receive all the benefits of full membership. So we've taken much more of a place-based approach rather than going in the RDC space. But if you want to chat further, I'm happy to take a call.
I just had the same question in relation to power companies.
Yeah, so power companies, it's been interesting. We have a few small scale developers involved. AGL is probably the most familiar name that you'll understand in terms of energy companies that are a branded company that have joined. I mentioned ACEN Renewables before. Eric can chat to you a bit about how they want to be involved in the bid moving forward. And then we also have companies called Aries Renewables and Atlas Renewables. They all start with A, don't ask me why, but they all develop and intend to operate smaller scale solar installations. They have sites up and running, but they're looking at dedicating, I think Aries Renewables is looking at dedicating 7 hectares of one of their sites to be one of the research and development locations west of Dubbo. So that's the kind of spectrum. It's very small to large, but in terms of other energy tech proponents, we do have several strong agrivoltaic developer owner operators involved from overseas as well.
Anything else? No, I'm happy to pass on information afterwards. So we'll let you off the hook there, Liz. Again, thanks for joining in and squeezing us in.
My pleasure. Have a lovely afternoon. I'm so sorry I can't stay online for the whole event, Eric, but you're in good hands with Eric's amazing work. So good luck.
Excellent. Thanks, Liz. Okay, so I'll kick off next. So kind of taking one step back, the idea here is that we want to try and talk today about different concerns, strategies, and research opportunities to answer more questions in this space. And so hopefully in the next few talks, we'll dive into some of this. And again, we'll have a Q&A at the end that we can dive into some more specifics. And we'll try and get our clicker to work. Here we go. So again, I don't think anybody in this room needs this extra background information, but we do know that there's a dramatic increase in renewables. That's not Australia specific, that's worldwide. And again, I think a lot of us would agree that it's a good step away from fossil fuels, but there are concerns about their impacts. So we do know that especially large-scale solar, it does have a large footprint, takes up a lot of space, and there's probably something already in that space. So lots of discussions about what's the best way to move forward, given that we know that this takes up a large amount of land. And so we often hear about these land use conflicts. And so again, on one side of the quote unquote fence, you might hear that renewables are taking up prime agricultural land. We've got lots of productive landscapes for agriculture, for cropping, for grazing, and things like that. And on the other end of the fence, we go, oh, well, we don't want renewables in our natural areas because it's destroying wildlife habitat. And so again, we have this kind of dichotomy where we have an argument of, well, where is this stuff actually going to go? Where does it make the most sense? And where can we minimize the negative impacts and create the benefits in any one of those landscapes? So most of you, again, are probably familiar with agrivoltaic systems. So ways of becoming, sharing that landscape. We often call it land sharing schemes. And this is a good opportunity to have what we call win-wins. So again, by having proper siting and landscape level management, we can have things like grazing, having sheep under panels, and energy production. So in these particular cases, you might have solar farms that can use grazing livestock for vegetation management. And again, from a grazer's point of view, you might be able to still feed your livestock. That land isn't unusable now. Again, if you're leasing that land to the solar company, you can still put your sheep on there. They still can use and utilize that feed. And from the solar company's perspective, you're getting essentially, free vegetation management. You're not spraying, you're not mowing, or you have reduced costs associated with those. So we can definitely use those kind of multi-use landscapes to still have winds. And again, there's many different levels of this. We can still have these multi-use landscapes, even in the cropping areas where there's lots of shade-tolerant crops, certain species that might thrive underneath shaded panels, and we can still use that space for more than one use so that we don't double up on those things. Now, from a wildlife perspective, again, where I'm coming from, I'm interested in taking that approach and stepping into conservation, into natural systems and environmental impacts. And so we've developed what we call conservoltaics, so nature conservation plus photovoltaic energy. In other areas, they might call it ecovoltaics. And again, this is a system where we're hoping that we can develop and manage these large landscapes so that we can also have biodiversity on site. And so again, it's not a one or the other. And so again, can this be another win-win? Or in some cases, can you have renewable energy production, you can have grazing, and you can have wildlife. And so now we're into the win-win-win. And so how many wins can we really tack on to these things? So the major gap here, though, is that the rate of construction is happening so quickly. We get lots of projects that are in development, and it's outpacing our knowledge of how these systems work. So again, even though these are large systems, they go up fairly quickly. And what we don't want is for our entire region to be filled with large-scale systems, and we don't really know what the impacts are. So it doesn't really help us in the end if we basically say, what we should have done is we should have raised, the panels up 30 centimeters higher so that we could have sheep under them, or we should have spaced them out slightly larger. No one's going to go back and fix those things. What we need to do is have early and often conversations with a variety of people, including site designers, land managers, the construction companies, landscape ecologists, and people that have all these inputs to figure out, well, what is the best way forward. And in order to give that kind of recommendation to some of these development areas, we need to have some data to back up so that we can say, look, this has been tried, this is giving us a better output, you'll have healthier sheep, or you'll have better vegetation growing under your panels if you do it this direction. So that rate of construction that is outpacing us at the moment is really where this big gap is. We need more resources and data to inform how we should shape how the future of these sites are built and constructed and managed. And so can it support wildlife or biodiversity? So many studies from the US and Europe are ahead of us in this space. They've had many years of this kind of data going forward. And so a lot of those studies have basically showed that, yes, you can have biodiversity, lots of wildflower plantations, higher numbers and rates of pollinators, butterflies, native bees, even bird species on a lot of solar facilities compared to adjacent farmland or what the land condition generally was before it was constructed. And so we do know that works in some cases. Obviously, Australia is a much different place than the US or Europe. And so we need our own data to be able to back up that, yes, similar types of trends still exist. Or in certain ecosystem types, in arid systems, maybe it doesn't work as well, or we need to adjust the types of plants that are there. And again, this all leads back to, well, we need some data to enforce what our decision-making ability really is. So this can be achieved, again, if we're strategic. And I think this is really where we're sitting at the moment, is we need to have a nice directional kind of outline of where we need to go as a country in terms of developing how this is all working. So obviously, we want to minimize things like complete clearing and habitat loss. They're already major factors for biodiversity loss on a large scale. And so by clearing areas, you're still going to have some of those negative impacts. But I think what we can do is we can try and maintain connectivity and rehabilitate some areas to rebuild and kind of design some of these systems to reincorporate some of these lost habitats. So I often think about this kind of stepping stone approach where it may be useful, see if our pointer works here, to connect different patches by a nice corridor of good habitat so that species can travel, whether that's a bird or frog or anything else, moving between 2 points. But in many cases, that kind of linear trajectory may not be possible. And so by having little stepping stones, little patches throughout the landscape, species can still kind of hopscotch through the environment. And again, if these little islands are maybe represented by panels or patches between arrays, we might be able to achieve similar types of connectivity through the landscape by, let's say, having native species growing underneath panels, low-growing native grasses, or maybe on the periphery to reduce dust accumulation, we've planted shrub rows or certain trees that aren't going to shade out the panels right next to them. And so I think there's a big opportunity here to go in with a design in mind and collect some data to see, well, how can we make these sites more usable and strategic so that we get these wins right off the bat. So again, we've talked a lot about site design, and I think this is where a lot of discussion comes in. Again, in my view, I think these large kind of seas of panels are probably less useful. Whereas if we can have these patchwork of designs where we leave some remnants and bits of vegetation in between panels, you're basically creating new microhabitats or retaining habitats that are important to a lot of species so that they can be some travel throughout a system. Whereas if we look at this previous slide, there may not be any good travel corridors through that whole area. And so if this whole block is fenced off, that's essentially all habitat loss. Nothing can really get in and use that, or at least not very easily, compared to a patchier system where we know species will travel along tree rows and things like that. Some of our previous work has done this tracking animals in agricultural landscapes, and you can see 2 of these individuals. These were rattlesnakes in the United States, but they followed a lot of the tree lines through these open bare paddocks. And so again, if you visualize, instead of this open field habitat, could be the same thing as a solar array. And so even having some periphery areas, a lot of species can still travel through that landscape. And so what I tend to think about this is, how do we build kind of an organization that can achieve this type of a model? And this brings me to Dr. Josh Ennen, who's going to speak next about a system like this that works really well. So Josh is visiting from the US. From a group called the Renewable Energy Wildlife Institute, or REWI. And Josh looks after a lot of the projects on vegetation and biodiversity and wildlife on renewable projects. And so we have a lot of similarities, given Josh is also a wildlife biologist and has transitioned into renewable energy. So happy to have Josh on board here, and he's going to walk you through a little bit about his organization, some of the things they've learned, the opportunities, and the things that he would have wished we had known, 15 years ago, because that's kind of where we're at this stage, is what should we have done? And we can maybe take some of those lessons from what REWI has done and collected to help us kind of develop what's going next. So I'll pass it over to Josh, and he can talk you through kind of the REWI model.
Thank you all. So Josh Ennen with REWI. Let me make sure clicker. Okay. So REWI is a nonprofit, and we're very unique and niche, if you will, that we are made up of renewable energy companies and also the conservation science community organizations. So what we call environmental nonprofits. So on the renewable side, we're made up of about 15 to 20 renewable companies that focus on wind, and some of them wind only, but also some solar only, and a combination of both. Just to give you a general idea of what our makeup is, these renewable companies represent roughly a little over 60% of all installed capacity in the United States. That's wind and solar. So they either own or partially own over 60% of renewables, excluding geothermal. And then, so if you break that down on the wind side, that's roughly 68% partially owned or owned. And then on the solar side, since it's relatively new in this space, so REWI, backstory, we started as a wind only 15 years ago, and this much recently we switched to do solar as well. So our solar companies are coming on board and building more, and they represent last year roughly around either 42 to 45% of all installed capacity in the United States. So these are the big players. On the nonprofit side, we have the big NGO groups. So the ones I like to point out, Ducks Unlimited. So some of these you might recognize. Nature Conservancy is a global brand. Audubon, which is focused on birds. But we also have like Sierra Club, the Teddy Roosevelt Fund, Union of Concerned Scientists. So the list goes on and on. So I put this up there to show you these are groups of individuals and companies and organizations we bring together working for a common goal of responsibly siting renewable energy, wind and solar, but also keeping in mind wildlife and ecosystem considerations. And so essentially how I describe REWI, it is the table at which all these unique voices sit. So essential collaboration, communication early and often is kind of our slogan, bringing people together, being transparent, being trust brokers, all trying to work for a common goal of responsible siting to minimize climate change, but also have wildlife and ecosystems in mind, so biodiversity. And not only are we made up of these companies that pay my salary, of course, but we also have liaison relationship with state and local regulatory groups, also the federal agencies. So we have almost quarterly calls with a lot of these groups where we ask them what they're hearing, what's going on at the federal level, the state level, and they want to know what REWI is doing. We also have research projects with the national labs, a lot of university partners, and a lot of the industry trade associations. So American Clean Power is one of them, and the Solar Energy Industry Association are partners of REWI. And we also have one of the big ones that is the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. So those are the state agencies, so they are part of our makeup as well. And we also do a lot of work with consultants. Consultants are on the ground, boots on the ground, collecting a lot of data, and this is valuable data for scientists if we can aggregate the data. So one study at one site is valuable. I'm not putting that down, but aggregating all these one-offs into a data set will give us a lot of things, a lot of understanding about regional and also landscape level benefits and impacts. So where is solar in the United States? So roughly we're the size of you all, and solar is going about everywhere. When I first started working in this space, solar industry was really confined to the desert Southwest, California and Nevada, and that makes sense because this is our solar resources. Basically, cloudless days is one of the ways they calculate this. So if it's dry and arid, you don't have much clouds, you have a lot of solar resources, but as you can see, we have a lot of resources, through the southern part of the country, and some of these trends are following that. But solar light energy hits the planet everywhere at certain rates, and you can see that we have a lot going in the Atlantic slope, where most of our population is, and we have a lot in the Midwest, where a lot of our ag, so that's our breadbasket. So we have a lot of those land use conflicts in the Midwest and basically in the desert and everywhere. So what I show this map is that not every region, just like you all, not every one of your states has the same issues with biodiversity and wildlife, okay? In the same way with the United States. What we learn in California may not be applicable to what we have in the southeastern United States, where it's very green and lush and we have different biodiversity. So what I say there is we need all that unique voice from all around. So land use comparison. So the United States, the last administration estimated that we needed, and I'm doing this on the fly here, acres to hectares, about 2.8 million to 4 million hectares of land converted to solar panels if we're going to meet our decarb goals by 2050. That's a lot of land. But to keep that in perspective, that's roughly 2,200, today, solar takes up 2,250 square kilometers. That's where we're at today. So we need a lot more. Just to keep it in perspective, this is a map or a figure from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And these gray boxes represent relative areas that are disturbed by these types of things. So golf courses, we have about 9,000 square kilometers of golf courses, 12,000 square kilometers, airports, and the list goes on and on. Corn ethanol, we have almost a little over 150,000 square kilometers. So there's a lot of land use going on. So solar is a small fraction of what's going to be converted. And when it's not all going to be converted from pristine habitat into solar, some of these will get taken up by solar as well. But you can also see that by 2035, this is what utility scale solar patch should look like. That's how much land we need to keep on our decarb goal. And these are all the other relative mixed use landscapes under there. So much like probably Australia, livestock and feed is one of our biggest land uses, and it will continue to be that way. But we are in the South, all through Midwest, Southeast, and even into the desert somewhat. We're trying to run a lot more sheep under these facilities because local agrarian communities want to keep the land in agricultural form. And there's some innovative companies in the United States that are actually trying to figure out how they run cattle under these things. So when that happens, cattle is always king in the United States. So that will be the big ticket item if they can figure out how to mix solar and cattle, because that is a big chunk of land use that we could use if we can pair those up. I put this slide up here not to brag about what REWISE solar program does, which I'm in charge of, but what I want to show you is this is the kind of stuff that we do. Like I write a national research plan. So what are the research that I feel we need to do? But keep that in mind, it's not I. Then I write these impact summaries, which is the solar energy interaction with wildlife and their habitats, and I'm updating that now. So these are basically state of the science. It's like, what do we know about these questions? I'll have it in there for you, all the research. And the things that I say is backed by data. I usually don't overstep the data. As a scientist, that's where I stop. I don't want to project or say things that I don't have data to back up. So that's what these documents are meant to be, is what do we know and how do we use it? We put on solar symposiums. So we put on every other year, we get all the researchers, all the stakeholders together and have research scientists talk about the state of the science. And that's usually attended by 400 some folks, some years less, depending on where we are. But it's a way to get all the voices in the room. We put on workshops. So in the southeastern United States, there was 6 state agencies that came to us. It's like, we don't understand wildlife and solar interactions. Can you train us and teach us? So we got industry together, we got scientists together, and we basically did a solar 101 to let them understand that wildlife is a very small part of the overall siting and permitting process to solar. So it's really interesting. And another thing that we're doing on the solar side, we got a federal grant to start pooling, aggregating these one-off research and monitoring projects into a database so we can really get at regional landscape questions. Like I said, one population, studying one animal in one population at a solar facility is great, but if we start accumulating and looking at regionally have multiple projects, then we can actually say something about the landscape. So I say all this to say that I didn't just make all this up. What I do is I read all the literature. All I do is read scientific papers. That may sound boring, but I actually love it. But the key here I want to talk to you about is stakeholder engagement and assessment. So we do surveys, we do interviews with all these unique voices that are around the country, and we ask them, what are the concerns? Because not all concerns are equal. Like everybody has a unique voice in this space. So we have surveys that we did. We had third parties we paid to do surveys and interviews, and we also asked other organizations, have you done surveys? We took all this information, and we had about a little over 2,000 respondents, and I was going to run through kind of what are the concerns in the United States currently. So the question you should ask, who are the voices and what ratio do you have? So about 60% of voices that we heard in these surveys and interviews were state agency folks and industry. So key decision makers in the space. These are 2 folks that you want to talk to, want to understand their concerns so you can have research to help inform their decisions. Federal government, so we have a federal nexus, so federal agencies, we had about 13%. And then the rest, 22% were filled in by the nonprofit NGOs, consulting, academics, and agriculture. So it's a good representation of the key decision maker, because really you want your science to inform decision makers. Not everybody's a decision maker. I'm not a decision maker. I just want to give you all the data to make good decisions. Okay, just like Australia, we have states and regions that are unique. So these are fish and wildlife regions. So they're numbered, so you have a general idea where they are. And this just says where I heard the voices. And a lot of people work in multiple regions, so these numbers don't add up to 200. If you're really good at math, you probably would have figured that out. But all I put this is say that most regions, we had over 40 individuals or 40 respondents say that I work there. Alaska falls short, but Alaska does have one facility, a PV facility, and another one going in. So Alaska will have some solar. So instead of going through question by question that was asked, I was going to give you broad interpretation of kinds of questions we ask. So we ask questions about what species are at risk, what are the challenges with certain species, so what species and what group, and we have all sorts of different questions about that. In general, no pattern really. I mean, I'll rank these eventually, but just to say that everything was said there was a concern about, from birds to bats to threatened endangered species, big game animals like pronghorn and elk, all the way down to your lonely tortoises in the southeast and southwest. So the point being is everybody's concerned about something. What are the risks to these species? And these will be unique. But these are really off-site landscape level stuff, so avoidance. They're concerned that their animal of choice will avoid these. So it's kind of like habitat loss. Habitat loss and fragmentation, displacement, they move to another range. Barriers to movement, so gene flow and migratory routes. And then a lot of people were concerned about panel collision with birds. But I put these pictures to the right to say that there are ways to mitigate a lot of these concerns. There's ways that you can microsite, which basically you go out, pay a consultant or a biologist to find sensitive resources on site, and you can avoid those. And that's what happened at this one site. And while they were avoiding it, they broke the facility up, and now they have wildlife movement passages. It's a win-win for a lot of things. And on the bottom right is a sage grouse. And I know y'all do not know what that is, but it's a sensitive species that avoids oil and gas production. So all these gas and oil mines in Wyoming, they avoid that. Lo and behold, Wyoming put a solar facility in, a company, and they found this sensitive bird species is hanging out on site. There's about 20 of them. And the researchers that did this said that it's loafing. I don't know what that means, but it has thermal refugia, so it's hanging out under the panels. Ongoing research that my company, it's partners, not us, but our partners and friends are paying for this research to see what is this bird doing? Is this population, can this population persist through time? Other things, I know it's a lot of text, so I'll fly through it. We ask things like, what are the on-site risks? So a lot of construction, vegetation removal, stormwater is a big deal in the United States. A lot of erosion's concerned, soil health, and microclimate effects. And I also like to add, in any survey that REWI does, we like to ask, what are the benefits of solar and stuff like that? Because we want to hear those types of things. You know, we hear a lot of things about greenhouse gas reduction, which is the only reason renewable energy is put in on the landscape, is climate change and reducing greenhouse gas. But we are starting to hear more and more about biodiversity enhancement, vegetation management, dual use agrivoltaics, ecosystem function and service. So a lot of people are concerned about a lot of different things. And obviously, we ask a lot of questions about mitigation. So ranking these, now I know these are not mutually exclusive, but bear with me. We rank them into topics and species because it just makes sense in my mind. And really what you see is the topics in the United States that they're concerned about or want to know more data is about on-site cohabitation. So is solar suitable for X, Y, and Z species, or what communities can be there? And we don't have that data yet. I feel like the first thing you need to understand is what can be there, what cannot be there, and then you look at population dynamics through time. The next is vegetation management. If you're going to have things on there, you're going to have native veg or some type of vegetation to provide quote-unquote habitat for certain species. Ecosystem service is a hot topic in the United States, so biodiversity enhancement, carbon cycling, water cycling, nitrogen cycling. Wildlife-friendly fencing, we have big game, we have lots of mammals, and we want to know how that impacts or helps them move through the landscape. So permeability. Movement and connectivity, people like to hunt in the United States, so they don't want their whitetail or their pronghorn or their elk to be messed with. And then community studies, what I mean by that is species richness and abundance, how these change through time based on the solar facility being there. Species-wise, we hear more about butterflies and native bees, so insects more and more through time. That has a lot to do with the pollinator habitat initiatives that are going on in the state. So you put pollinator habitat on there, grows beautifully, you'll get a really increase with native insects. And that's a bottom-up effect. Then your birds will show up. They've shown that. Next is migratory birds. This has everything to do with the federal nexus. So we have federal legislation, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and also the Bald Golden Eagle Act, where you can't mess with birds. So obviously, if there's federal nexus, it's going to be a concern for folks who are trying to get these facilities permitted. And then we heard less is about reptiles and amphibians, and that's mostly tortoises because they're threatened. species in a large part of the country. And then migratory big game, because Americans love to shoot things, and it's our American pastime. And I will say this, I don't say that cheeky, because the North American model for the states, conservation is funded by hook and bullet. So fishing and hunting license pay people like me to study non-game species and game species. So more hunters, the better, because we have more money to do biodiversity research. So I got interested in, okay, that's what everybody's concerned about. What does the research say? So this is published, peer-reviewed publications in the United States, but also interviews. I wanted to know, what are you doing? What are you doing? What kind of topics are you studying? And this is what this represents. So by no means is this really number of studies. That's a bad axis. I need to change that, but I'm being lazy. So if these are studies, it could be a review paper that suggests all these things, that mentions it. But really what I want to say is, does the topics that people are concerned about, does the science feed into that? Are we doing the right research? Because research for the sake of research in this space isn't moving the needle and helping inform decisions. That's what my job is, to inform decisions. I don't make decisions. I'm not advocating for you to make decisions. I provide you the data to make you a more informed citizen. So it does overlap quite significantly. So wildlife community studies was on that top 6. Cohabitation, yes. Soil effects, we can put that into ecosystem services with carbon cycling, it's carbon health and soil health through time. Movement and connectivity. So I put that up here to say that in general, research is tracking on the topic side pretty well. On the species, remember, it's kind of inverted. You have insects were 1, birds were 2, and they're flipped here. And really what happened was about 10 to 15 years ago, they found carcasses of birds at PV facilities, and that spurred on a lot of research and a lot of monitoring. So if this is what you see, all these number of studies, is because of consultants going out and have to monitor in the desert Southwest. But it's very localized to the desert Southwest. Bees, this all comes from all that, like I said, the pollinator initiatives in the Midwest. Did I move it? Yeah, I did. There we go. And then you have your smattering of other things like non-game mammals, reptiles, amphibian, bats, and big game. The one thing that's way off the list is your migratory species. And the reason there's not many studies on that, it's just a lot of money to study big game. Right? Sometimes it's helicopters, netting, pronghorn, and then collars. It's never cheap. So I'm interested in regionality because the country I'm from is very large, much like yours, and all your states are unique. It's similar to the United States. Our states are a lot smaller than yours, so fish and wildlife regions are probably, I say, analogous to your states. So I ask, all that data you just saw, I asked, where's it coming from? And it's really Pacific Southwest. So California and Nevada, that's where all our federal land is, to be honest with you. So if there's a federal land, you're trying to cite on federal land that my taxes pay for, you have to go through lots more hoops to get it permitted. So you have to do an EIS or EA, a biological opinion, etc. So that's why there's more data there. And California is a more progressive state, and they have a really stringent state wildlife agency that requires a lot more too. So it's lopsided. That's all I'm saying is lopsided. But think about this. This is a figure of actual data. Boots on the ground. You paid me to go out there and collect data. Again, 60% of all our data has been collected in California and Nevada. So what's going on in the desert Southwest doesn't inform me to tell X, Y, and Z stakeholders from the Midwest what they should do at their solar facility. So it's lopsided. And I want to point out, I don't know if did we keep the next slide? This is where I'm from, if you can hear my accent. Oh, good Lord. I'm from the Southeast. One study, Florida panthers, and that's a rare species. So they collared a bunch of Florida panthers, and they look like, how about connectivity around these solar facility in the peninsula of Florida? That's it. That's the only thing we know in the Southeast. The Southeast has some of the most biodiverse region in the world. We have more salamanders, crayfish, mussels than any other country on the planet. The state of Tennessee alone has more fish than most countries. And we have more trees, birds, bats. I mean, all those things the Southeast has, and we have one study on a panther. So I'm saying it's lopsided. So we need more money to do more things. Like, money is always a bad word. I should have said resources. We need more resources and capacity to fill in data gaps. So next I want to talk about, is solar compatible? In my opinion, we must make it compatible. If we're going to turn 2.8 million hectares or up to 4 million hectares into solar facilities. Why not do it a little bit better so we can have our wildlife? That's just me personally. I think it can be done. We just have to do some things, and we have to do more research to talk about it. So this is a figure I want to show you. So this is a figure of a solar facility that I took on my plane ride to Las Vegas. So it's blade and grade. That's typical out west, where they remove vegetation. And it's not just the companies because it's easy. Some counties in the west do not want vegetation on these sites for fire hazards, and they can't get insured unless they do it that way. So don't point the finger at the industry saying, why don't you leave veg? Sometimes they can't. But times are changing, and this is a solar facility outside of Vegas, the one and only in the United States that has done what they call over land travel construction, where they drive down one row, put the panels up, so they can skip this one, skip that one, and move. And they're very deliberate using low inflate tires, rubber tire tacks. So they're trying to minimize soil disturbance and leave as much vegetation on site. Because in the desert, once you disturb, it's going to take decades, if not centuries, for restoration to occur. So this site here, we have a webinar that's going to go on in July. I can't remember if it's 24th or 25th. But we'll have researchers talking about cryptogenic soil, biocrust, the soil disturbance, wind erosion, and the plant responses. And we'll also have a lady, Alice, will talk about they're reintroducing a federally listed species, gopher tortoises, which I have published multiple papers on. I have it's dear to my heart. And they're going to talk about space use and reproduction. So that's where I think we need to think when we think renewable energy is these types of things. Veg, native veg if possible, but any veg is better than no veg. And these aren't parking lots. These have value to some species, and we just have to keep that in mind. Not all species, but some. So this is one I wanted to highlight because I know the Western Australia and a lot of parts of Australia are desert. I had it on there, forgot. So this is a continuum of construction practices, what I just showed. So this is avoidance, which would be your plus, like native, no disturbance whatsoever. And then so if you touch the screen, it goes backwards. All right. So this is the gradient to most disturbed. So blade and grade, heavy, you disc roll, grade, fill, trench, remove soil, disturbance, high. Then you have your drive and crush where they just roll over the veg. The veg can come back. They can mow it to a certain height. All right. So you have a little bit more disturbance. Topsoil remains, but you have some compaction. So you mess with the seed bank. But this overland travel is the one I just showed you from that one facility. And so far, it seems like it's the most minimum construction practice in the desert so far. And I took this from a consulting report, which I found, I should make it into a nice figure, but I'm not very artistic. So that's what you get for overland travel. So what's next? I always think, me and Eric talked about these last night. And anything like, land use, communication early and often. And that could be with the landowner, that could be with your local extension office, the university, everything. I think, in my opinion, be transparent, be honest, and where the cards lay out, they lay out. I think that's how I've always operated in my life, is just be brutally honest. We don't have enough data. I don't know. Is acceptable. Okay? So keep that in mind. But you can't feel like somebody's out to get you. Like, ask the questions, and if you ask me a question, I'll be honest when I answer it. That's how I operate. And I think that we need more communication, more transparency, and just know that everybody's trying to do it right, okay? And if they're not trying to do it right, those aren't the people you want to work with. Identify regional differences or research priorities. So these are the things I wish we would have done 15 years ago when I first started solar. I wish we could have got everybody together, and I could have interviewed all of you and multiply that by 50. So I can identify what stakeholders need what research to answer their, make their decisions more informed. I don't have that. So that's why I'm kind of behind the 8 ball with the kind of analysis. And we didn't really do the surveys that great. We need to work with the scientist that does social surveys like that. And if you can do that, you can get topics, species concern, and the one thing that I'm missing is the local landowner. Like, most solar facilities go to die at the local level, because in the United States, if it's not on federal land, depending on what state it's in, it goes to the local level. And some local commissioners, like, I do not want solar here, so there's no solar in that county. There's some counties that allow solar, but there will be some voices in the room that says, I don't like this, this, and this. So I need to understand what at the local level, what folks would like to see and what research can support those decisions. Because a lot of times I hear they're toxic. They'll leach all this bad stuff. And there's science out there suggesting that is not the case. So we just need to know those things so I can, when I write my materials, we can distribute to the right people at the local and I have the right information. And this all is farmer, industry, communities. I think all voices, no matter how big and small, are important in my opinion. When I write things for REWI and it goes out to all our stakeholder groups, just imagine getting reviews back from 14 different people with 14 different opinions. So my job is essentially write it right down the middle, give them the data, and make everybody mad because I didn't listen to their opinion enough. So my job, I get yelled at by people like you, but I'm okay with that. As long as I feel like I'm moving the needle forward and you're more informed by meeting me. I think I call that a win for me and a win for the wildlife. Use research and science to inform decisions. I don't say anything I don't have data to back up. That's where my honesty comes from. Because as soon as I say something that doesn't have data, you don't trust me anymore. And I value trust above and beyond. It's almost like we're in a marriage, right? Start with targeted surveys that inform priorities. If you can do that now, researchers won't be doing things on solar facilities, doing research that doesn't inform decisions. So I would say get a huge group together. You can start with a small group like this, identifying who needs to be in the room, but then start talking about what are the decisions we need to make solar go on the landscape more wildlife friendly, more ecosystem friendly. And then start thinking about, okay, who are the scientists we need to talk to fill in those research gaps? And if you do that, you could be in a good place in 10 years, easily. But you're going to have the resources to do it. And that's all I got. Thank you all. You want this one?
So we've got some time for questions for either myself or Josh about kind of what we're planning to do in Australia, or if you've got questions about how things are working in the US, priorities, anything like that. Again, if you're online, you can submit your questions to the forum. I did see one online. Maybe we can start with talking about what happens with fire. So you talked about how a lot of industry is worried about fire and managing risk on large scale solar. And so do you know any, Josh, of any types of systems that try and have species that either require fire or how do they manage fire risk and solar at the same time?
I haven't seen any scientific papers about fire response of wildlife on facilities. I don't know how common it is. I haven't read of that it's widespread. I think it might be localized and very, very few and far between. I have been on sites where you can see arced wires where there's sparks, but there hasn't been widespread fires that have been contributed to solar, PV solar in the desert Southwest or anywhere that I have seen. So that might be because in some of the drier where vegetation is more inclined to burn, that they don't have vegetation there. I'm not for sure. There's a lot of things that people ask me I don't have data for. I don't have a database that says, I usually get questions like how many have wildlife friendly fencing? We don't have a database that has those kind of attributes. I don't have a database that says how many has pollinator habitat versus non-pollinator habitat. Those are actually a little bit better. You can actually get a general sense of that. But we don't have those types of databases, which I wish we had, so that we can inform local landowners about it. So fire, yeah, I don't have a database that says how many fires have been on solar, which is unfortunate.
I think the other part of that question, Eric, as well, was just
like fire adapted communities.
Yeah, are we likely to see a change in vegetation? Say if a solar farm can retain native ground cover, how might it change over time if, say, some of those species that require fire to generate can't? And do we know yet if there's much research on that? And it did also make me think of the microclimate kind of research that you're doing also.
Yeah, like Josh said, I think there's still a ton of things that we still need to look at and collect data on. In terms of fire, either prone species or species that need fire in their life cycle, they're probably not going to be great under solar panels, I would guess, just because most of the large scale companies, one of their major concerns is fire and reducing that fire risk. So they may not be the ones that are being sown underneath panels and things like that. But again, that's kind of yet to be seen at this stage. And there's lots of work, again, as Heidi mentioned, about the microclimates under panels. How does that influence soil health and drainage and different vegetation types and the shade and sun patches? That's kind of a whole new area that we're beginning to tackle. And hopefully as part of that, the CRC bid, as well as some independent research at UNE. So hopefully in the future, we'll have some of those good answers. But yeah, fire is definitely something that pops up a lot, which is why a lot of companies need to mow or graze often to keep that vegetation low. Just to reduce fire loads. Yeah,
I'll jump in and say that in some fire adapted communities, so the southeastern United States had the longleaf pine savanna, which is fire adapted. If the species doesn't require fire for germination or seed production or that unique life cycle, a lot of the species in the southeast that are native to those savannas are not there anymore because of understory. So if no fire, you have this woody understory that shades it out. So mowing and grazing, so piney wood cattle and goats could, and you're not gonna put goats on a solar farm unless you have the panels raised, but keeping the woody stuff out would mimic kind of that grassland savanna where tortoises live, grassland birds. So I think the grassland species, that biodiversity response will probably be a little bit better. But again, like we talked about earlier today, there are gonna be some species that won't be compatible. And I always say, like if we're aiming for perfection, we're not going to get there. So what I always say is like, let's just try for good. Like I don't think a solar park or a farm or whatever you call it is going to be 100% compatible or comparable to a native system. It's just not. I mean, you put humans anywhere, it modifies the surrounding landscape. So I think the win for me is stacking things like Eric talked about, stacking as many wins as possible on a piece of land. And then is that good enough for you to sleep at night? And to me, I think if I can do small wins and stack them, then I think I'm doing my job. So the point is not all fire adapted species could be on solar, but there could be a subset of that community on site. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yep. Back. Yep, just make it green.
Yeah, so there's just a question kind of about the whole concept of how you do the research or think about your research. And they're thinking about that slide where you looked at how much land solar farms might eventually use, and then all sorts of different land uses, starting from golf courses and then going down to the big one, which was corn. Surely there's lots of things to be learnt from those land uses and the relationship with wildlife and biodiversity and research and sorts of data and stuff that could come across to this as well, like without having to just say the only way we can get data on this is to do research on solar farms. Would you agree or disagree?
I agree.
Oh,
I agree.
And you tell me what but how would that, like, how would you get that? I mean, I don't need to be right. I need to hear.
You are right. But I will say this. That will take you so far, and you can run up against it. I mean, it could be anybody. They'll say, well, where's the scientific data for a solar facility in X, Y, and Z? And you can point to all sorts of things: island biogeography theory, disturbance hypothesis theory. There's all these theories that bore out in the ecological literature that could apply to solar facilities. You just pull on your ecology cap. I think landscape ecology has a lot to do with it, but I hear it a lot where some agencies were like, if I don't have the data for solar, I don't believe it. So you can get technical all you want, and you can talk about disturbances, X, Y, and Z, but I will say that is solar disturbance the same as other disturbance? And I would say that I've been pleasantly surprised that some species 5 years ago, if you asked me could be on solar, I'd say no. Like sage grouse is one of them, and tortoises would be another. So I'm pleasantly surprised by animals' resilience to be on these facilities. But I agree with you, yes, we can learn a lot from what things that we already done. But sometimes it comes down to people won't believe it unless you hand them a paper about that system. But no, we're same team.
Dave?
So you had a lot of studies there on ecosystem services. What sort of evidence is there that vegetation or biodiversity is providing services that benefit the actual solar array, like dust protection or temperature modification, that sort of stuff. There are many studies that are showing that.
There was one great one because I started considering solar as a novel ecosystem. I was like, man, if you have 10 million acres or 4 million hectares of solar, that's a new form of ecosystem because it adjusts the abiotic, which is microclimates, so temperature, soil, moisture, and all that. So to your point, I didn't think the way I was thinking about solar would be applicable to the desert, but people smarter than me were working on cryptogamic soil biocrust, which is a symbiotic relationship between fungi, algae, and bacteria. And it's the fertility mantle of the desert Southwest. It's the one that grows at the very top, and when it rains, it's the one that does the nitrogen and carbon cycling and provides nutrients for plants. So biocrust happens, makes it fertile, then plant seeds happen. They grow them on solar facilities now in Phoenix, Arizona. And they found that because of unique microclimate, it grows faster. So that's the stuff that holds the soil in place to minimize dust. So if you think about Arizona and Phoenix, they have huge dust storms because the desert has been modified. So this group they did a back of the envelope calculation, like if we started growing these crusts on site, and they started harvesting the crust, moving them off site, and they found that if they inoculate the soil again, it'll keep growing 3 times faster. So they talked about maybe we can start repairing the desert and stopping the dust from blanketing Phoenix, but also the panels. And there are also research where you grow crops on the facility or native vegetation that evapotranspiration, so more humidity and more cooler temperature underneath actually increases the efficiency of the panel. But that was only done in one study in one location, so more of that needs to be done. So yes, there are those types of ecosystem services. And the other one that folks talk a lot about is if you embed a solar facility in a sea of row crops, like in the Midwest and the United States, you have this pollinator supply. And what that means is if you do pollinator habitat, you have all these beneficial insects that will go out and increase yield because of pollination. So those are studies coming out of Europe and the Midwest. So there's the list like that, but they're very narrow, and there are only a handful of sites that they've actually done this on. So I see value and hope in a lot of these ecosystem services.
Well, we might maybe move on. There'll be time for questions in this space later on as well. So we kind of keep on track. Thanks, Josh. That's great.
You're welcome.
And Martine, we'll pull you up next.
Martine's intro.
Otherwise,
It's not the question, but
If you do that, I'll stand up and play it. Sorry, it's a glare over there. I'm just trying to find it. I'm gonna try and get this green line out of here. Okay, so next we have Martine, who's worked in the renewable energy space for the past 10 years, helping to launch Australia's first cross-sector group, PPA, then developer side, before making a shift to this year to focus on a collaboration and best practice, currently leading the Wimmera Southern Mallee Region Energy Collaboration Project. So thank you. If you just clip that on there and.
All right, can you hear me? Great. Oh, thank you. Now, thank you, Eric and Heidi, for having me come and speak to everyone today. So as Eric mentioned, I have come from about 10 years working in renewables, mostly on the developer side, leading community and stakeholder engagement across Australia for large-scale renewable energy projects, mostly wind. Before I go any further, I would just like to acknowledge country and pay my respect to the Anawan, Banbai, Dunguti, Gomeroi, Gumbai, Guinea, I can't say that one, Kamilaroi and Nurabul people who are among those who have a long and enduring relationship and are the custodians of this country. Before colonisation, this country was a vast symbiotic composition of organisms living rhythmically in tune with each other, understood and cared for by through respecting law. That's LORE. We have so much to learn from over 60,000 years of living with country. And through combining recent science and traditional knowledge, we might just find a way to live within planetary limits. So in terms of why I'm talking to you, we face a biodiversity crisis as well as a climate crisis. And from working in renewables, that's certainly why I got into working in renewables, is because it's important that we rapidly decarbonise, but we do not want to do that at the expense of nature. And ultimately, what I've learned in the time that I've worked in this industry is that we should be able to build renewable energy projects in a way that can coexist in a net positive way. So that might be net positive or create net gain opportunities. And that can be complementary to farming practices or complementary to nature, as long as Josh put it, as long as we understand the data in the first place. And I think in this country, we're sort of in a data deficit. We don't have, we've got a lot of research, but we haven't got a way of sort of bringing it together. So what I'm looking at the moment is I'm working with the renewables sector, as well as the science and conservation NGOs, some of the main ones across the country, to explore the opportunity or the possibility of creating a biodiversity and renewables institute for Australia. Now that sort of sounds like, well, we've just heard about the Agri-Solar CRC, and now this would be something that is much more similar to REWI. And I suppose that's kind of why I'm here today. It's because in about August last year, I started speaking with Abby Arnold, who's recently stepped down as Executive Director of REWI. And she's been an amazing 50 years of experience, mentor and guide of how they set up REWI 17 years ago in the States, and how we could possibly do something similar to that here to understand the state of the science in this country and determine where we need to focus our efforts for more research, and then build out solutions and technological interventions and appropriate siting decisions from there. So I can probably skip to the next slide now. So we have global indicators that we need to respond to. Obviously, you know, there's a bit of a language shift around net zero, net gain, nature positive. We're even talking about moving away from nature positive here in Australia, but really that comes from a global biodiversity monitoring framework. We do risk, obviously, the rising biodiversity challenges. Social license is a huge one, and I think that you know, there was a brief mention earlier around, you know, the political sort of ideologies that play out in this space, but I think where we can really focus our attention is around social license, is where we can deliver real, genuine benefit, and listen to real issues and try and, you know, provide responses to those issues based on evidence, based on data. Where we want to try and move towards is creating more self-sufficient and autonomous regions and communities. So this is the dream. The Biodiversity and Renewables Institute for Australia would be a cross-sector collaboration that ensures nature and clean energy thrive together. It will become a national hub for innovation, best practice and collaboration at the interface of clean energy and biodiversity protection. Certainly in the renewable space, particularly because we've had 5 years of kicking the can down the road since the Samuel review of the EPBC Act. We don't, I mean, I would say that we have a little bit more investment certainty today, but we're still square peg round holing a lot of the planning around projects because the planning requirements were not written for renewables. So we need greater investment certainty, and we need to understand our implications better so that we can reduce impacts to biodiversity. We need clarity on the risks and siting solutions for large-scale wind and solar, obviously the trusted data and science. We need to think about practical coexistence models, so nature-based solutions, how we can partner better with the agriculture sector to increase regenerative farming practices or natural capital on farm that will have dual benefits to both industry and farmers. We need to optimise opportunities for partnerships, particularly where we can catalyse investment from other sectors who need to, that have reporting obligations around climate and nature, and where we can see greater investment in conservation, biodiversity protection. And obviously, we need to contribute to our social licence to operate. But ultimately, underpinning all of that is something that we all need. We all need clean air, clean soil, and clean water to live. We need nature restoration and protection because biodiversity is quite literally the life underpinning our life. We want to work towards First Nations self-determination and knowledge application. We need sustainable land stewardship and farming practices, and ultimately, more biodiversity gives rise to climate stability. This is a really busy slide, but this I might not go too deep into because we've talked a bit about agrivoltaics and conservoltaics. But I just wanted to sort of point out that, I've spent a lot of my career so far in wind, whilst I have worked on a number of solar projects. I think that, there's just so many opportunities in solar, and, the fact that we can combine biodiversity benefits or farming benefits with solar is huge. But ultimately, I came across this fact the other day, which I thought was pretty amazing, that every day the sun shines around 173,000 terawatts of energy onto the Earth, which is more than 10,000 times humanity's daily energy needs. So we can definitely power our lives without fossil fuels, I hope. But I thought I'd just touch on how we can use a model like a Biodiversity and Renewables Institute to influence state and federal policies. As I mentioned, the EPBC Act is something that has been waiting for reform for some time. But I think we all can agree that government follows. We need to lead. And I work in an industry with a lot of people who actually are in this industry because they really do want to see these projects be built well for people and the planet. And, not every developer is like that. And I totally get that. But there's a lot of, I would say, genuine commitment to making sure that these projects are not just an energy project. So how can we feed into for state and federal policies, and how can we lead the way so that they will follow? Obviously, there's nature repair market, but how can we look at biodiversity stewardship sites that are also co-hosting renewables that might be solar or wind? In situ restoration and protection of biodiversity, and encourage Indigenous knowledge and conservation efforts. All of these contribute to requirements under EPBC. In terms of a state-based, and I just included a New South Wales one, they use the biodiversity assessment method. And whenever you take away any vegetation, it's declared you're starting from zero, and you have to increase the quality or the value of that vegetation post construction. But how can you do that through biodiversity gain within a solar farm? So don't degrade it in the first place. And I suppose that talks to kind of what Josh was speaking to earlier. I'd say one of the areas that government is really lagging is in that restoration space. They've put out you know, their nature positive plan and the nature repair market, but restoration, if we look across each state, basically biodiversity is just completely on decline. I was looking at the Victorian inquiry into extinction rates the other day, and I mean, it was completed in 2021. Government was supposed to put out a response in 2022. They've never put out a response, and everything that was in there as a recommendation, they've done the opposite. So it's just, you know, I think we can't rely on government. We have to try and do some of this legwork ourselves. And restoration through how we partner with traditional owners, with farmers, and with the conservation communities is going to be really key. And I think that there's an absolute win-win with projects where they have conditions under their consent to deliver against, you know, their compliance obligations. So we should be going beyond compliance. So the next slide is really just who's at the table for this discussion. We're starting with industry and doing a gap analysis at the moment with industry, working with World Wildlife Fund Australia to undertake this gap analysis. And that's really like, what are the priorities? What are the problems that industry is really coming up against around siting, and where do we need more research and data, and then do the same with the science and conservation sector. And then we'll run a series of roundtables and make sure that we've got all the right voices and experts in the room, and maybe we'll even get Abby Arnold out here from the States to help guide us through this process. But this is kind of how we're stepping it out at the moment. We'll co-design it from the ground up. We've thought about how it could look. Obviously, tap the knowledge rich to make sure that it's got the right voices around the table, and then we co-design what work streams it could enable. So obviously research and informing policy are two areas, but how can we create a fund to invest more money, which is what we need, into research and innovation? There's a lot of technology that exists in the world that needs to be sort of retrofitted to the Australian context. We need to actually try it with our unique species and see what will work and what doesn't work. But we actually need to get cracking on that before we have too many more projects getting built. And as I said before, how can we partner with other sectors to catalyse greater investment and then see bigger bang for our buck? So yeah, I think that's pretty much about it, because that slide just really talks about what we're going to be doing, next. But I suppose, yeah, from here, I just wanted to say, you know, if anyone is interested in, from particularly a land care perspective, or if you're involved in any of NGOs, please reach out. Happy for Heidi or Eric to share my details. But it's a slow process, but it's an essential one. I'm very confident that that we can build these projects in a net positive way, and we can see people and planet thrive together. But we really do have to, you know, Rewire's been around for 17 years. We need to start now. So I'll end there.
Thanks, Martine. We've got some time for a couple questions before we break for tea.
There are a couple coming in online.
Okay.
So I have to go there first. So Eliza asks, will local government be involved in any of the initial investigations that are occurring?
Oh, there we go. Local governments, as in the co-design phase.
Yes.
So they will be involved, but not necessarily like it'll be more of a representative organisation for like the Local Government Association of Australia, because we need to sort of start with industry, science, conservation, NGOs, build out the governance structure, and then we'll bring in all the other stakeholders. Yeah. And government agencies, not just local government.
Any more questions from the floor? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking at your who gets a seat at the table. Is this the right way? This close or down there?
Light on?
Sorry? Yep.
Yep. Good.
Yeah, thanks. I just looked at your who gets a seat at the table, and I'll be blunt. I'm sort of from a agriculture point of view, you know, and I just wonder why your circle for ag is so small if the fact is that most of these projects are going to land on existing agricultural land. And if you really, really believe what Landline said, that it can be a huge advantage to ecosystem services and to our bottom line as farmers, which is absolutely needed in Australian agriculture, especially in New South Wales, where there's so little government support for the sector. I think our circle needs to be a lot bigger. And, you know, how do you plan to do that?
I agree with you. And the circles are not necessarily representative, but in terms of agriculture, will absolutely be at the table in terms of how we, if we can create this type of institute, then they will be a key stakeholder in it. And I think it's really important that we improve the relationship between agriculture and clean energy. I mean, these two sectors need each other to exist. And okay, sorry. Yes. One needs the other to exist, rather. But I mean, in terms of if we're talking about sort of decarbonisation, whatever scale we're looking at. Yeah, well, that would be ultimately that would also be great if we could all just be off grid. But agriculture will be at the table, and the circle is probably not entirely accurate representation, but it's a conceptual pitch at the moment. It's not set in stone.
And just perhaps almost a comment from Tara, but she says, how much input do you think government will willingly give? They are notoriously difficult and too slow in getting actual change across.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure on that one too. I think we'll probably have maybe a little bit more luck with the Commonwealth departments, like the DQ, and maybe states like Victoria and New South Wales that have done really specific work on wind or renewables guidelines. We'll probably have a little bit more luck with them, but yeah, we'll see. We can only bring them in, and if they want to stay, they can stay.
Okay, if people want to come and sit back down, and if you're online, feel free to come back and join us. Looking forward to the good, too much good cheese. Eric, less cheese next time. Sorry for the people online. I hope you have your own stock of good cheese. So just before we go into the panel, I just thought I'd have a bit of a chat about the context here and also some of the collaborations we've been involved in locally. So I'm Heidi McElnay, and I work with Community Power Agency as a regional partnerships coordinator here in the New England. And I support cross-sector collaborations formed through a shared interest in shaping the renewable energy rollout to be better for people and the land. And we've heard our first session, so many exciting collaborations in this space, of land and renewable energy, REWI, and in Australia, the exploration of a biodiversity and renewable energy research institute, along with the AgriSolar Cooperative Research Centre bid. And Eric runs the Renewables Hub at UNE, which is a great initiative bringing academics across different schools and to collaborate and as a central point to also interact with developers and other people working in renewable energy. Dave Carr from Stringy Bark Ecological and I also developed this Building Better Biodiversity on Solar Farms guide, drawing on Eric's research and the expertise of others in this room and online and further afield. And it's designed to be a practical toolkit to support landholders, developers and other groups such as Landcare identify, discuss together and implement strategies for shared land use on solar farms. We held a workshop last year at Big Ridge. Thanks, Richard, for having us. And thanks to the New England Landcare for supporting us. We held another one in Glen Innes, thanks to Glenrack. And there are copies of the guide to take at the back if you haven't already. Eric, Dave and I have also been co-convening the New England Biodiversity Reference Group for the past 2 years, where we've created a space for people with local knowledge of conservation and land management to contribute ideas for low impact transmission line planning and management to Energy Co, as this state-owned infrastructure planner moves ahead with designing the new wires and poles and substations to move renewable energy to where it's needed. More recently, the Nature Conservation Council has been running workshops locally to better understand what's needed to achieve a nature positive RES. And if there are other local land and renewable collaborations happening, I'll invite you to share them in a few minutes. But moving now to the policy context and incentives, currently in New South Wales, there isn't a clear pathway for projects to be recognised for good practice in shared use planning when it comes to the approval process. So with any of these big developments, the planning authority is New South Wales Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure, not the local councils. And in the approvals process, proponents must provide detailed information on their proposed projects' likely environmental impacts in the environmental impact statement. But the framework isn't set up for a development footprint type that sits atop the land, allowing for life on the ground beneath. So concurrent agricultural land use or positive initiatives to regenerate land, waterways or soils aren't adequately incentivised currently, I believe. Although this is exactly the type of information that's invaluable to include in an EIS for project neighbours and the surrounding community. Last year, the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, DECU, released a consultation draft assessing partial loss of biodiversity values, which recognises that biodiversity loss may not be total within a development footprint for projects such as solar farms, for example, where native ground covers can be maintained with the right construction and management methods. So this could prove to be an incentive for enhancing biodiversity on solar farms if it means less biodiversity offsets are required. Speaking of biodiversity offsets, last month a new regulation under the Biodiversity Conservation Act was introduced to offer an alternate approach for the provision of biodiversity offsets for certain renewable energy and transmission projects. This new approach allows proponents to enter into a strategic offset delivery agreement, or a SODA. And the SODAs involve the proponent funding DECU to carry out actions of retiring like-for-like biodiversity credits or funding conservation actions targeted at species or ecological communities impacted by the development. I sound a little bit like I'm going to cry, but I'm not really. I'm just a little bit nervous talking. But whether proponents are arranging their own biodiversity offsets or whether the government does this for them, can these offsets be leveraged for better biodiversity outcomes within the vicinity of a solar farm where that's suitable? Other mechanisms we can look to fund conservation or restoration works could include carbon farming in the nature repair market. Other incentives for farmers might include the increased emissions and sustainability reporting in supply chains required by industry association and markets both here and overseas. And for industry, it might be ESG and other climate and nature financial disclosure requirements, as Martine mentioned. And natural capital accounting is potentially another. And these all probably deserve presentations of their own to fully unpack how we can leverage them. And when we're considering methods of valuing natural assets, we must acknowledge the holistic and sophisticated ways traditional owners care for country and what we can stand to learn from this. And indeed, there's much work happening in our First Nations communities with education, mentoring, and employment of younger First Nations people in conservation, land management, and ranger programs, and a big appetite to grow this should resources and opportunities allow. And at this point, before we go on to introduce our panel, I'll ask if there are any other collaborations or projects happening locally in the land and renewables space that they'd like to share any details about. No? Thought I'd ask, you never know. Okay, great. Well, now the fun part. I'm going to introduce our speakers, many of which will be known already to people in the room. But let's go. We've got a mic here. Dave Carr, would you like to come on down? Maybe we'll start in the comfy chairs.
Thank
you. So Dave Carr is Principal Ecologist of Stringy Bark Ecological, and he's on the board of Armidale Tree Group. And Dave has extensive experience in ecological assessment and restoration in the New England. So Dave, you've spent many hours working on sites planned for renewable energy projects. What makes you hopeful that this change of land use could be a positive thing for the natural environment of the New England tableland bioregion?
Thanks, Heidi. How long have I got?
Just a couple of minutes at this stage.
I just need to declare my interests first. As a consulting ecologist, I work for quite a number of renewable development projects. I also work for quite a number of farmers. I work for quite a number of local councils and a number of conservation organisations. So I sort of have an interest in all stakeholders in this area. So my interest has been, my work throughout my career has been in the interaction between biodiversity and agriculture. You know, biodiversity on agricultural land, and the overwhelming negative impact that agriculture has had on biodiversity in the last 250 years, but also the positive changes that I see individual landholders and networks of landholders starting to do, and that are starting to happen, you know, all over the place. So one of the lessons I've learned from that is that there's a inertia in there built into agricultural systems to try and move back to a more biodiverse system to protect threatened species and to protect ecosystem services that are produced by more natural areas. And that inertia comes from, it might be the way that things have always been done, and it's hard to change things around. The way the industry functions, that you've got to have certain amount of, you know, cattle doing certain things or sheep doing certain things at certain parts of the area. But often it's a financial inertia that you just don't have the capital to make a change. You have to maximise the return on every square inch of your land, and that you're sort of locked into a box of doing things in a certain way, and it takes quite remarkable people or remarkable circumstances to break out of that inertia. And my mentor through my career was David Curtis, who some of you will know, that I worked with through Greening Australia, and he talked about these these magical moments that come along where you've actually got some sort of thing that breaks that that nexus, and it might be at an individual level. It might be a person who suddenly, you know, their neighbour walks off the land because they're sick of it and they don't know what to do. So they have these magic sort of moments where they suddenly change the way they do things. Or it might be a financial thing where they just suddenly decide that, you know, that cattle prices go up all of a sudden and they've actually got a bit of cash and they can actually go and put in some new fences or new dams or whatever it is. So I see the renewable agriculture interaction, that this renewable energy provides an incredible opportunity for a break away from that inertia, just an opportunity for an injection of capital, a replanning of the landscape at a paddock scale or at a whole of landscape scale, that we could actually take as an opportunity to not only you know, do something about climate change, invest in this region, but at a very local scale, start to you know, invest in better biodiversity management on farms with agriculture. I'm also, you know, not hopeful about the uncoordinated way it's being rolled out and how it's just going into all the landscapes that we've already that are left over from being damaged by agriculture. So now we're working on the hills, and I don't think we've approached that, but I think there is quite a bit of hope there for that.
Really interesting answer. Thanks, Dave. I might call up Richard Munsey then. So Richard is a 6th generation merino sheep grazer at Big Ridge, Uralla, and is a landholder on the New England Solar Project. And Richard's also working to increase the health of his family's land through planting shelter belts and protecting waterways. And Richard, how have the sheep adapted to grazing under solar panels, and how's the productivity?
Thank you. For now, we've been grazing under the solar now for nearly 2 years, probably 20 months. Everything seems to be going quite fine. There's some logistical issues with mustering and changing how we're going to do things, negotiating with the client at the moment for better access and a smoother operational, more functional things for us. But the sheep themselves, it's a bit of a no-brainer. In the summertime, they can have shade anywhere in the paddock and still graze. So instead of sitting under a clump of trees in one corner and the food's on the other corner, they've got shade everywhere. Vice versa, in the winter time, frosts, they can get under the panels. If it's raining throughout the year, they can stay dry if they choose to. But probably the biggest thing is the shading and the tilting of the panels and how they're shaded, and the different microclimates underneath them that are starting to become present, very, very visible to the eye. So it has changed. It changed a lot of things, and I think one of the biggest things we've got to do to utilise those in the future is make your paddock sizes the right size for the farming enterprise that's utilising them. So there's a heap of little changes there, but it's yeah, it looks pretty good.
And are you capturing that kind of feedback, like when you're getting an idea of, oh, this would be easier, or that, you know, I'd do it that way differently, or can we change this? Are you sort of documenting them or speaking with any researchers or anything about that?
Yes, we've been working with Eric and Asen to start a project there, and we've all had the same discussions. All the farmers have sat down with Asen with the same discussions on, all right, we need this to change, that to change. Mainly around fencing and getting that right in the first part. So stage 2, we're hoping that the design there will be a little bit more accommodating, but every farmer has a different size farm and different size mobs and a different direction on how they manage. So
yeah, it's not one size fits all.
It's not one size fits all. Everybody's got a different point of view, but ACEN have been very good, and they're looking forward to taking over from their handover period in the first part of that construction. And then we'll actually, once they're totally in control there, I think we'll get a little bit more done. And hopefully in the second stage, a lot more of that stuff that we're sat down and talked to them about will be sort of sorted out in the pre-note before we get to that stage.
Yeah, great. That's really good to hear. And we were going to have Steve come along. So Steve, he's an Anowin cultural knowledge holder, and he also is a cultural heritage advisor at UNE. And he's got a maintenance crew that works on one of the cultural heritage sites on New England Solar as well. And they just won an award the last couple of weeks or so, at the 2025 National Trust Heritage Awards for that Grinding Grooves project. And Martine, if you would like to come down. So we met Martine earlier, of course. It's fantastic you could make it here. I'll just ask you then, why should renewable energy companies be interested in generating anything other than energy on their project sites?
Well, they absolutely should be, if they're genuine about being, good corporate citizens or being part of a community, which they often say that's what they're doing when they come and engage with landholders and communities, then good developers need to do that really early work, understand what is it about, what kind of region are they stepping into? What is, what kind of farming region? What are the, who are the local trusted voices of the region? What are the sort of historical, even voting behaviours of the region? Like what are you walking into, and how can you work with that community in a way that is going to support their lifestyles? And I think, we were just having a sort of side conversation before. So I hear it everywhere I go in regional Australia. There's not enough, rural decline is really real. And I think these projects can deliver a lot of economic development benefit, not just to host landholders, not just through community benefit funds or schemes or whatever they want to be called, but ensuring that legacy goes beyond just payment and energy. It's actually coexistence. And I think, there's huge benefits in being able to design projects that will enhance biodiversity, enhance farming practices, and the projects themselves or the developers, they can claim credit to report against their ESG and climate related financial, like they get the win out of that too. But I think, you've got to do what you say you're going to do.
I love the way you've described that. So the sort of cherry on top is these kind of incentives or fulfilling their ESG requirements, but actually it's an opportunity for genuine engagement when you're speaking with people about the history of the land and what their hopes are for the land and what they need to retain and what's required in that region to support a healthy landscape. They've actually got the opportunity to do that through how they plan the use of the land. Great. Now, Melanie, would you like to come and join us? So Associate Professor Melanie Filios is an anthropological archaeologist and Director of Place-Based Education and Research, working from the Office of the Vice-Chancellor of UNE. Melanie, how does major land use planning change, in this case the declaration of a renewable energy zone, influence the research and education focus of UNE? And also, what role can UNE play in terms of contributing to how the RES is rolled out? Big question.
That one. Now it's on. Yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot in that question, and I think all of you have already hit on one word that's common to every. You've all said it, and that's opportunity. And so we can look at the RES in a variety of different ways, but one of the things that it does offer is the opportunity for community to work together with local government and science and education, but it also offers an opportunity for economic renewal of our regions, and that's something that Martine's just touched on, as well as change in our farming practices and whatnot. And I like what you said, David, which was maybe it is, how did you phrase it? It's a breakaway from the inertia that has characterized, I think, some of the region and some of UNE. So what everyone has demonstrated here is the multidisciplinary nature of the renewable energy zone, and that's in our opportunities, but also in our challenges. And so it really highlights the need for our local government and educational institutions and community to work together. And I think one of the things that we're really working on is listening to community more, but also educating community. So one of the challenges I'm sure that Energy Co faces is in that stakeholder management, and you've mentioned it so many times throughout your presentation today and yesterday. The stakeholder management is key. So where the university can come in, aside from research, and Eric can talk about all the research projects that are already happening at UNE in this space, but there are far more in the planning space, in the community space, in understanding renewables, in understanding solar, and understanding these impacts. And these extend beyond degree programs, but to community itself. So one of the things that we're working on a variety of different things, but one of them is looking across all of the academic offerings that we currently offer and pulling out those that might be helpful to community. So making them open to community in shorter bite-sized versions. And that's to help with general knowledge and understanding. So for example, if a wind farm is going in your area, can you object? Is it really going to kill birds? Where's the research around it? Where do we find that? Another area we're working on is trying to bring that research together and make it available to community. So using AI to create engines that make these tools available to anybody in the community so that you can better understand the impacts of the RES and a project near you. And I think the key here is education. I mean, we're obviously in the business of education, but I think in recent years, UNE has maybe gone away from our regionality and from the things that matter to our community. And so we see the Renewable Energy Zone as an opportunity to get back to that and to get back to being a real player in our own community by offering the education that's relevant for the future. So I think we'll all agree that the regions are sometimes at a deficit model with respect to our services, our education, our resources. And I think that the RES is an opportunity to begin to change that. But even more than that, I think we need to look much more broadly and say, how do we help to set an example for the rest of the world? How can we use the knowledge that we've gained here, whether it's in biodiversity or whether it's in community stakeholder engagement, to help other areas? Because I think, and I firmly believe that it's only through education that we begin to change lives and change minds. And we can have the best program in the world, but it isn't going to help us if the majority of the community sentiment is against a project. So I guess that's a very long-winded way of saying that, yes, absolutely, UNE is looking at the opportunities that the RES brings to change our offerings and tailor those offerings to go back to our regional roots.
And that's so exciting to hear about UNE really stepping in and supporting the community and being agile and being relevant and being region centric. Mm-hmm. And thanks so much for sharing all that with us as well. Pleasure. And now I'll vacate my chair for you, Eric, if you like, and Josh, if you would like to join the panel, and then we'll open it up to questions from the room and online. We don't have a massive amount of Eric, perhaps would you like this?
Let's just get CNA last week and that's just so have it run.
I can pull that off.
Yeah.
All right, well, you've already heard my background and things, but I guess we can kick off with some questions. So one of the first questions online was for you, Richard, and it was about the kind of design of the paddocks and how sheep are able to use the solar site. So from memory, the question was, can the sheep move around? Are there, like, what's the paddock design that you've got? And can sheep use that for laying as well?
Yeah, they just choose wherever they want to lay. I suppose each block is different in itself from each farm. I'm leasing one that is basically all panels, and one block that has been completed in stage one that we have is 250 acres, and it is basically just one big open paddock, but it does have a dam and a mountain in it that they couldn't put panels on. So throughout the solar farm, there's a few areas like that. So it's not all panels. What was the rest of the question?
About reproduction, I think. Do you have lambs in there?
At this point, they preferred not to, but they are changing their thoughts there, and basically it was just the reason of the extra dead ewes and what were they going to do with them, and what was going to happen, and who was going to clean them up. So joining time and lambing time, I don't run any ewes under the panels during that time.
Yep.
So that's in the future if the farmers want to, I think.
Yep. And in a kind of best case scenario situation, do you think having multiple paddocks set up would be ideal so that you can rotate through, or is it easier to have one big continuous paddock to muster, or do they all have pros and cons?
All have pros and cons. Once again, it comes down to the size of the mobs that you manage outside as opposed to what you have inside. So for me, yeah, the smaller paddocks, one, they'll be easier to muster. They are difficult to muster with the panels, as you can imagine. Mustering in the middle of the day when they're flat, you can see underneath them, your dogs can see underneath them, and they run as a mob, where if they're tilted late in the afternoon, they run down and then jump through, and it becomes a little bit hard to muster. But yeah, that's going to be an individual thing. But on that point, the only way to use the paddocks and graze them properly is to have them at the right size. So that depends on your mob size. But yeah, the smaller, the easier you can graze it and use it that way.
Yep. Excellent. Other questions from either the room or online? Yeah, sure.
Just in terms of, I know you just mentioned you don't, what was the term you used? Lamb, okay. But I think you said join, but when the ewes have lambed, do you have a higher rate of, or less mortality of lambs under panels, or is that not known yet?
Not known yet, because we probably don't go in there that soon after they've lambed. But most common theory is that if a ewe doesn't have to walk away from its lamb, so if you can lamb underneath the panels, if a ewe only has to travel a small distance from the shade and the shelter and has good feed there, I think the lambing percentages jump by a hell of a lot. So if we can lamb under the panels, there's a good chance that you've got more shelter, and if you're rotating and they're going onto fresh feed, well, then there's more benefits there. Grass is shorter and as well, because obviously it's got to be maintained at a certain height for fires. So that's a changing thing throughout the year, depending on the fire dangers. According, ACEN are working their way into it as well. It's not just a handbook that 100 mil is all you're allowed to have. So we're working with them to control that in different ways and minimise their slashing. So we probably should be paid more money.
So just to, sorry, are we allowed to ask questions? I was just going to ask, so you don't have any figures yet up here for marking rates plus or minus under the panel?
No, not yet. It's only been 2 years, and we haven't on the New England solar farm, we haven't lambed under them yet. It's something into the future.
Can I ask an additional question? Just an additional question on that, while you're sort of on that topic of paddock sizes and things. I know Landcare had a bit to do with ASN, or when the solar farm was being designed.
But from what you've just said, it sounds as though you would like to be able to divide some of those paddocks a bit smaller again. What would be involved at this point, now that most of it's developed, in making those paddocks smaller? Is it just a matter of, I'm not sure what my question is a bit about that farm planning sort of stage. If you'd had an opportunity at the design stage to say, okay, that's a 250-acre paddock, but when you've finished putting your solar panels up, I'd like to be able to split it into 4. Did you have that opportunity, or is that something that in hindsight you'd like?
One thing, the way that ACEN built the project was that another company came in, they designed it, they acquired everything, they erected it. So basically ACEN sat back and let another company build it. And it was just going to be a bonus for most of the farmers to put their sheep back in there, but a bonus for them because they won't be slashing. To your question now, we've now spoken with them on the ground and had a look at some options to run fences underneath the panels themselves, so that in the future, so there's a 2-year handover for ACEN, and once they get that, and they'll be actually doing the operational. At the moment, we're going through the people who constructed it. So they're managing it for 2 years or the handover period. So yeah, in the future, ACEN are very keen to go ahead and do what suits the farmers. Where that leads to, we don't know, but we've been in talks to them about that.
So yeah, just to add to that, we're designing some studies that we can look at some of that, and some of it includes even temporary fencing so that we can have smaller sub paddocks at the moment. So yeah, lots of discussions, I guess, at this stage of what works best for what group and how long-term it needs to be.
Yeah, I think it'll just come down to what the farmer wants and what they can get over the line, because there's a lot of internal roads as well, and a lot of access needed by them when they're checking the safety and whatnot of panels. But we've had a look, and yeah, it shouldn't be too hard to chop it up a little bit more that suits the farmers and the grazing.
We've just got another question online. It's a bit like that: water points or water infrastructure for the paddocks. Were there dams already? Was it a big undertaking to get water down there for the sheep?
Once again, it depended on the block. One block that I'm using, ACEN supplied. I did the work. ACEN supplied the materials, and we plumbed some pipe in and put a few troughs in place. Some of the other paddocks already have a dam that was kept, probably, and some were filled in. So depending on the farm and the block is how they've had to negotiate that. But every time you cut up another paddock, you're going to have to organise another water point as well. So there's a lot of options there. It's just a matter of what ACEN are willing to do at the end.
Excuse you.
Hello, my name's Emily. I'm a strategic planner at Uralla Shire Council. My question is around the scale at which we're thinking about these things. One of my frustrations from where I'm sitting in local government, we have no real power over every project. We seem to be the only level of government that can see the cumulative impacts, connect all of the dots, and also are close enough to the ground to be having those conversations with landholders, with energy companies, with the Department of Planning, with Energy Co, with Transport for New South Wales. Like, it feels like at the coalface, we're right in it. The issue with the EIS process in New South Wales is, of course, site by site. So the developer cares about their patch and that one site that they're on, as the council officer in my community cares about the entire region. So take Yarrawick as an example, where we've got 3 major wind farms proposed, none of them are consented. Every single one of those wind farms will do their own biodiversity study. The data will go, who knows, it go into the EIS, whether it's collected at scale. But then the process at the cumulative level across all 3 sites is almost ungoverned. So my question is, like, firstly, Martine, I don't think it's going to cut it having local government peak body representation. What's the reality on the ground is that local government is the delivery arm of the net zero transition. But I guess the question is, how do we, one, get the data from across a range of sites, and then how do we, I don't know, ensure that if 2 projects go and take all the remnant veg out of a ridge line, that the 3rd project is not allowed to go? I mean, the first part of that.
I quickly say just in terms of, I mean, so there's the Commonwealth are looking at the regional plans, and then we've got bioregional plans in Queensland's doing a lot of work in that space, but IBRA sub-regions. And I suppose I'm not saying I have an answer for you, and I fully agree with you in that there needs to be a better way that we can assess cumulative impacts around biodiversity. That's what I'm talking about. Particularly, I know that there's cumulative impacts for lots of other things, but from what I'm sort of looking at in terms of how we assess or improve landscape scale, whether it's restoration projects, would be looking at government frameworks like IBRA sub-regions, and any projects within that region should be working together to come up with conservation initiatives, conservation outcomes that deliver on the priorities identified in that IBRA sub-region. But that's, and I'm going to get the, I'm going to get the acronym wrong. It's the classification for a kind of bioregion. Yeah.
So sorry, I don't, I'm coming across quite aggressive. That's not my intention. We're all in this together. We're all trying to solve the same problem, right? I worry about the Commonwealth government taking the lead on that. I think by the time that they were to do sub-regional planning, like, we're running to the clock of a 2035 coal power shutdown in New South Wales, this stuff needs to happen in the next 2 years. Most of my proponents are going to be putting EISs in before 2028, and construction will start in 2029. So I guess what I would like to say is that I think if we're waiting for the Commonwealth, or we're waiting for the state government in the New England res to do this, it will not happen, and it needs to be happening at our regional scale, and we need to be collaborating all together, the people who are in this room right now, and leading. Because if we wait for,
I'm not saying we should wait for government.
no, I mean, well, solve the problem for them, right? Yeah, but I certainly feel, and I'm sure my colleague from Armidale would agree, that there is an inertia at all levels in the RES planning. Biodiversity is one aspect, water, waste, road infrastructure, accommodation, all of these areas of planning are in deficit. So I guess that's not really a question, it's a comment. Is there a way that we can just go, well, the Commonwealth government's going to do what it's doing, the state government are going to be dragging the chain. What can we do locally to ensure this, at least in our bioregion, an outcome that isn't that we lose all our remnant veg off ridgelines due to wind farms, and that we take the opportunity that Dave's just outlined to turn clapped out sheep country into thriving grasslands and woodland again? That's a question.
I'll just jump in there real quick, and maybe Josh, you were about to say this, but first thing that comes to mind is the Rewise database. So I don't know if you can talk about that, but a central location where all that data comes in, so that it, like you said, it isn't a site-by-site thing. We can have one place with all the information And, you know, who houses that is a different question. Maybe this new model that we're trying to put together so that there is a non-government agency where that data can feed in. Because you're absolutely right. If everyone's doing something unique, it might not be, you know, viewed as significant from a single perspective, but when you look across the whole landscape, you know, maybe that changes the view. So I don't know, Josh, if you can, you probably would have had this exact same problem, and maybe that's what came out of that was
Yes.
a centralized, you know, data repository.
To your point, this is where, yes, it is. REWI operates the American Wind Wildlife Information Center, which is a database that aggregates monitoring of wind turbines, post-monitoring, so fatality of birds and bats. And it is a relationship between REWI, a nonprofit, and our industry partners, recognizing that the power of aggregating data. So a sample size of 1 is good, but having a sample size of over 2,000 individual turbines or even more, you can start asking those cumulative effects or landscape level effects on what does a distance between, what's the distance of water for bats? Does that increase fatality? You can ask these questions that will inform maybe not sighting in the next 2 years, but the sighting after that. So I agree. You just have to figure out what organization can broker those relationships with the industry and have these databases. That database is not public because of how, if you can imagine, if there was a dead eagle at the site and had their name attached to it, there could be ramifications for that. But having a large scale database to answer regional and cumulative effects is valuable. And there's a lot of manuscripts and scientists that utilize that database. And we're trying to do that with solar as well. So studying things that have already been studied and gathering that information could go and help inform the local. I don't really understand the structure in who's the decision makers in Australia, but that would be valuable to you, I think, understanding where and what landscapes impact the densities and fatality estimates.
Can I add to that really briefly? So our DVCR is looking at a cumulative effects engine. So for that very reason, and we've had this conversation too, and you're absolutely right, and everyone's acknowledged that need. So I think right now the negotiations are about the funding. But if, you know, if a UNE plus the councils, local government, whatever, co-hosted that, and then the key there is that it is available to the public. It's not guarded. It's not in some place. It's just freely available. And so those negotiations are happening now.
That's good answers there for data that we need to see, you know, post the fact once these things come in. Well, my biggest concern about the whole renewable energy rollout is the lack of coordination of all those things that you just outlined. And for me, my interest is in biodiversity. You know, who is watching that? Who is doing that? And there is nobody, you know, that you talk to government and there's, well, we've got this act and it's taking care of that, and the EPBC is taking care of that. We've got potentially quite a strong divide in the environment movement within this region and nationally about renewables. And my take on it is that we're not going to stop it. We're not going to keep it out. We can either, you know, say no, 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 and just not be listened to, or we can say, okay, yes, you're going to do it, but do it this way. And I think the answer to your question is we need a really strong, coordinated regional voice from people like people who are in this room to say, this is our expectation. And you had a really good statement in your talk earlier. We want them to go beyond compliance, because compliance is crap. In New South Wales, the biodiversity assessment, the biodiversity offset scheme, it says it's no net loss. It's actually net loss. It's really bad. And, you know, they're trying to get it. If you could get it to no net loss, well, that's still not good enough. You want it to be net gain. And I think we need to set that expectation as a regional community, and all the different voices in this room need to say, okay, you're going to do it. We know you need to knock some veg down on ridge tops to put your wind turbines. We know you need to put turbines down. We know you need to put some transmission lights. Don't put them there. If you do that, go and plant all that out, save that species there, do some more here. So I think we need to, because government's not going to do it, as you say, and we need to take the lead ourselves and have a strong regional voice to do that.
Can I just jump to Lee online? Would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Hi Heidi. I was actually just going to speak to the council officer. I think it was asked a question before in regards to cumulative impacts, or made the comment. And just from a proponent's point of view, I'm lucky enough to work with a company that I've got 20 odd years in my background as an environmental scientist with oil and gas, renewables, and with mining. And unfortunately, when I came into renewables, it was a bit of a heartbreaker, because I really thought that was like, the change, that was where everything was going to be done differently. And it wasn't. So that was the unfortunate thing. I do see changes, but to the comment of the cumulative impacts, as one of the proponents that really identify this, acknowledge it, want to address it very early in the piece, it is very, very difficult, because we are one of the few proponents that want to cooperate, that want to share information, that want to engage in every level that we possibly can. And part of that restriction is the legacy, I suppose, that's been left over from the other industries, of the mistrust and the kind of activities that they took on. I was in the industry when all of that was happening, so I saw the worst. But we haven't had the opportunity to really show how different renewables can be. But just to make the comment to the fact that there are proponents, we are out there talking about cumulative impacts. We're very conscious of that. I mean, us personally, even from a First Nations point of view, doesn't necessarily have to be about native title. It really is about, the core values of the communities and the stakeholders. So just to let you know, as somebody who's in that space, that there are proponents out there. We are trying to find a way to communicate, to share information, but it's extraordinarily difficult because of the circumstances that we're coming into from the previous industries. So just more of a comment then, but also thank you, everybody. It's a fantastic session.
Can I add to that too? And I'll talk now about other work that I'm involved in, which is helping to lead and implement a regional energy collaboration in Wimmera Southern Mallee in northwestern Victoria. I think we've got 8 renewable energy developers involved in that project now, plus 2 transmission businesses and the Victorian Planning Authority, VicGrid. And I would agree that there is, like, you're starting from a trust deficit, like absolutely trust deficit, and there is an expectation, and this is not an excuse, but there is an expectation that renewables have to be perfect. And they have to also fix everything at the same time. So fix the housing crisis, fix the fact that schools are closing down, and like the pre-existing challenges that are faced in regional Australia were there before these projects came along. But we do need to see this as an opportunity to take the money and co-design together with regional leaders, better outcomes. So that's what we're in a space at the moment with. We designed a sort of a soft on-ramp kind of funding model for projects to pay to play in this regional energy collaboration. It's not a huge amount of money, but these projects also, I mean, transmission is different. They've got lots more money, and transmission have a totally different business model to renewables. But these projects don't have money until they have a financial investment decision. So you're playing with, basically, you need to use that time really effectively to engage deeply and understand if there's an opportunity to co-invest in local infrastructure or whatever it might be, local services. Then you do that work, that research early together, so that when it does come time to start paying money, so it might be through construction where you've got a huge CapEx budget, or it might be through access fees if you're part of a RES scheme project, and the access fees will, be fairly significant. But there's just a lot of unknown, and I think with this regional energy collaboration, like we've sectioned off into working groups that have been identified based on some of the actual real challenges that we're hearing from the communities, because we can't continue to pay as much as I've tried. Like, you can have one-on-one conversations with people to talk to them about, no, your kid isn't going to be born with deformities because you live near a wind farm, or, you know, there's a lot of stuff that comes out that you just can't feed into. But fire risk, for instance, how can we work with the communities to ensure that if local brigades need additional training, capability uplift, they're already under a hell of a lot of stress. We don't want to add to that stress. So how can we work better with them to start preparing them? We're really hopeful that maybe we'll have a co-investment model into technology called Pano AI, which is early fire detection technology that can go throughout the whole region. That would be amazing. That is a win for the region and it's a win for the project. We're starting really early in terms of trying to understand local grid constraints, because there's all these incentives for community batteries and all this sort of stuff. But is that going to work with the distribution network? So again, we're just trying to start really early before projects are approved so that we can help inform the government to make sure that the right projects get funded and they're not going to be sort of stranded assets. Looking at workforce development as well and career pathways. So we've got these groups and we're just ticking along slowly and we're working towards something, because these projects take a while. But it did happen because, whether it's through local government or a regional development organisation or a consortium of regional government and other community development groups or whatever they may be, to try and it's the same sort of model that happened in Hay, further down in southern New South Wales. How do regions sort of say, if you want to do business here, you have to do it with us? But I think we also need to keep in mind that these projects aren't going to be able to solve they're not going to fix the housing crisis, or they'll certainly fix the roads as they go along. Maybe not all of the roads, but how can they fix, how can they perhaps fill a gap that government is not filling, but not do the job that government's meant to be doing, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've got a question. Some ecologists, and the first I heard it was from Dr John Hunter at a land care thing in Glen Innes, are concerned that there are currently insufficient biodiversity assets left in the landscape to cover the needs of all infrastructure projects on the table. So where will they come from? That's the question. Or will governments not require offsets for at least state significant projects? That seems a bit obvious that maybe that's what they might do, given their record. I think there is opportunity for landholders in close proximity to repair degraded areas to become offsets, close proximity to power lines, whatever. But the real issue then is, will developers, government departments, or most importantly, the taxpayer or the power person who pays the power bill, be willing to recompense appropriately landholders to make it worthwhile? You can't legislate and say, well, you've got to fix this land up and you pay for it. No, that doesn't work. Such areas would need to be a long-term covenant agreement with management guidelines like the BCT. Payments, in my view, would need to cover all costs of maintenance or upgrading, and around 30% additional to what the landholder would currently make from livestock, as well as a CPI increase, which sort of ties in with biodiversity sort of stuff. The 30% is, in my mind, is a figure to compensate the landholder for any possible inconvenience of having a covenant on the land that at some point in the future they may wish to sell. And a buyer may say, oh, no, I don't want anything to do with the government, I won't even think about it. But the 30% should be enough of an incentive to make that worthwhile for the current landholder or a future landholder. Anyway,
can I
comment than
tackle that one, because that's exactly a lot of stuff that I'm thinking about. Yeah. So you're right that currently they're picking off the low-hanging fruit of to offset impacts. So under the New South Wales biodiversity scheme, they have to, if you do an impact somewhere, you can offset it by protecting an area that's similar, like for like. Doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it has to be fairly similar. At some stage, we're going to run out, and in Sydney, they're seeing this now, Cumberland Plain woodland, what little is left, anything that gets knocked out it's very hard to find offsets. So the price of credits and your average biodiversity credit, which is used to trade between offsets, here it might be about 5,000. In the Cumberland Plain Woodland, some of those communities are getting towards $100,000 per credit. So it's a disincentive to knock down stuff. So that's one. That's the way the scheme is supposed to work. That the scarcer something becomes, the more it costs you to knock it over. It's not quite perfect. As far as then creating new areas, which is what I would really like to see, that we're losing areas of vegetation here as you knock down, power lines, or you knock down areas for a wind farm. We're actually losing habitat. The way the offset scheme is, you make this area over here in better condition, but you still lose stuff. So we lost, multiple millions of trees in the 70s and 80s through dieback. So we're already way behind. We're in a deficit of trees or woody ecosystems. None of the offset schemes incentivise that. We've done 2 stewardship agreements recently in New England to offset a wind farm. The landholders were both willing to plant degraded areas of threatened ecological community, box gum grassy woodland. We put that into the management costs, and the cost of doing that didn't give you wasn't seen in the extra credits that you were able to generate from the project, because there's a built-in discount that's given for revegetation. They just presume. So normally you would get a gain. You would say, we've got no trees here. In 20 years, we're going to have, lots of trees. What they do is they discount it by 70% because they presume that revegetation doesn't work. So there's actually currently no financial incentive to enlarge areas or replant areas. That's one area that they could do. To your other point about doing things locally as close as you possibly can, that's the best thing. If you're going to have an impact here, you want to have the offset right next door, so that whatever population of animals or plants is affected is then offset as close as possible. At the moment, you could go anywhere with 100 k's of a project. You could go to Stanthorpe, you could do it. You could go to Nowandock and do it. Now, a well-designed stewardship project with good credits should actually reimburse the landholder plus lost opportunity costs for that exact issue, because one of the ticking time bomb, I think, is in 30 years, 40 years, 100 years, people selling these properties that have got a covenant, very tight conservation management. You can't really do much except manage for conservation. There's going to be a lot of properties out there that are worth very little, or that nobody wants to buy. And what we're seeing out west, I drove past one just the other day at Quambone, a trust property that was sold to a landholder. There's no compliance. That landholder's put 40,000 sheep on there, totally ruined the conservation value. And, nobody wanted the property, so he got it cheap. And there's very little compliance of those things. So I think it is a real issue we have to worry about.
Sorry, do you mean compliance or do you mean enforcement on the subsequent landholder?
Well, both. The landholder, the landholder, somebody buying a property with a conservation covenant on it, not quite understanding, not getting the benefit, the financial return, they could go and graze it against the management,
the covenant,
plan, or they could clear it or whatever. Currently, less than 1% of clearing cases go to court or are prosecuted. So there is a lack of enforcement because there's 2 people and a brown dog doing it for the entire state. So when it comes to private land conservation covenants, the enforcement will be even less, I think. So it's a risk.
That's what,
Could I just, Patrick's got a question. There's a disconnect between biodiversity management, ground cover management, erosion and sediment control, and then legislative requirements for fire and emergency management. And we heard sort of from you to Richard about needing to keep the ground cover, say, within 100 mil at certain times of the year, as per an approved fire management plan.
How do you manage those two requirements practically?
Do you mean on the farm?
Yeah,
Solar farm?
so say if a solar farm is required to keep vegetation that low.
Talking to ACEN, that was written up in their first thing that, all right, every ground cover should be at this. And I think requirements along their boundaries, some 10 metres wide, that have to be at that level. They are looking at totally rewriting that because they've understood now that coming into winter, there's not going to be a big fire risk. And we'd prefer that longer natural grass cover, which protects the ground from frost. So they're rewriting that to try and make it better for them, better for us. So we can utilise the grass more as graziers, and that they'll know when the times are that are risky. And so it's a monitoring thing, and I think it's a growing thing there, and that depends on the solar farm you're working with, I guess.
So we monitored the ground cover on Richards Place on the whole solar farm. That was a compliance issue. So they've got to keep 100% cover, but there's no, in the conditions of their approval, it was 100% cover by, I think, 2 years, but it was nothing about height, which, as Richard says, is a really important issue at different times of year.
Can I ask a very different question? Let's see if I can do this. Well, first, is the University of New England connected to the one that you are setting up? Yeah. Is it one of the groups involved?
Could be, but we are in the early stages.
Early stages, yeah. Oh, okay, thanks. So just a question around what I'm hearing is three things, but there's not biodiversity is not there in the upfront. The concepts of social impact or cumulative impact aren't there upfront, and the connection of dual land use or using dual land use, those three things aren't there. And so I'm just wondering about where institutionally, the people at the table who do have an institutional role, where do they see their space of advocacy in the planning space or at the government space or in the submission space, rather than in the ideas that you've got in your own institutions, but in those public-facing kind of spaces that we as community members are often asked to contribute to, say the recent New South Wales inquiry into the impact of renewables in our space, or currently the Net Zero Authority one that's having an inquiry that's open into and that particular one, they identify all kinds of, emission stories that you can apply to, but really we're all telling a story about social license. And if they really are wanting to hear from and collectively at a regional level, then it's quite important that social license piece that we're all telling the story about actually gets into these submissions. Sorry, I'm going a little bit spare, but yeah. So just curious as to where you see that happening in your world, like because I often we don't see stuff from universities in these inquiry spaces. We don't. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
That's a big one. So yeah, tell me, Annette, if I missed something, but I think that we see our role as generating research, so generating the knowledge, and then recently, as I mentioned, being able to make that knowledge available to community. So with respect to submission, for example, that would probably be up. I don't know that, maybe Eric, you might know more, that we have an institutional, let's say, submission to any one of these particular social license, for example. So we did bid on the pieces of work to be able to be the ones conducting it, and we were not successful. So that went to places in Sydney. All of those pieces of research did. So to my knowledge, we haven't made submissions in this space, but I think we see our role as educating community, as being a sort of impartial third party that can say, we can generate this knowledge, we can hold this knowledge, we can make it available to community. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I'm making a plea to those kinds of institutions that you all represent, that you pay attention in this space and make submissions in this space, because there's advocacy work going on by NGOs and all different people banging on the door, hello, hello, but this kind of very, quite significant research, you've got data, you've got evidence, you've got stuff to say, you've got ideas about things that could work. They should be actually being get to those government levels like this, the Net Authority one that I'm talking about, Net 01, it closes on July 9th, so I'd have a look.
And you can, I'll reach out to you and get those details, and Eric, maybe we can talk.
Can I just add to what Annette said, that I was on council for 13 years, and you can generate all the knowledge you like, but then if it's only individuals who get to put submissions in, or small NGOs or community groups, let me tell you, every single one, if it doesn't absolutely align with what the staff want, it's completely ignored. And the fact is that you guys have got the authority, and at some point you're going to have to step up, I think, in reality, because we've already said in this place that government's just not doing its job. So who's going to? Because leaving it to individuals is just not going to work.
I would say, I mean, I don't work for a developer anymore, but I would always see from a developer's perspective, like the person or the team doing community and stakeholder engagement, I always saw my role as I'm advocating for the community into the business. I'm wanting to understand how whatever change that is coming from a project is going to actually benefit the community. And I think, so there's different, I'm not representing necessarily an institution at the moment. I work for Wimmera Southern Mallee Development at the moment. And I'm sticking my neck out trying to start this institute based off what I've felt and experienced in my work so far. And so the main thing, I fully agree with you. I think how to create something that will create real benefit, real impact, you have to involve all the right voices. And when I say right voices, that's not just the experts in institutional levels. Like it needs deep engagement, but just on a developer level, and I'm not sure how many developers you guys have dealt with out in this region, but certainly the role of a community and stakeholder engagement professional is, they really should be advocating into the business for better outcomes.
Yeah, I just add to that, yeah, I think what we're trying to do is just break down all the silos. So as everybody's mentioned, there's lots of knowledge and lots of different groups, and we don't really have at this stage a unified system or group that can consolidate all that to get all that information out. So it's groups like this that, you have to start small before you get big, to be able to pull all that information and get people's concerns and thoughts and ideas all into and push it up the line so that big changes can actually happen. So I think it's this, we're at the beginning, we're at the starting point, and it's this kind of on the ground discussions and groups that try to bring together all those different groups so that we actually can make a big difference.
Yeah, it is 4:58. We probably do need to wrap it up, and I think Nova's going to shut and things like that. But someone wanted to sum up with something of that. I mean, that was a really nice note to finish on, I think, Eric.
Well, I'd just like to thank everybody in the room, and it looks like we lost our online cohort, but thanks to those that joined in. Oh, it's just the screen. Okay, well, that's good. And thanks to all our panelists for coming in. Really good discussions. Yeah, look in this space. We'll try and meet up again more frequently so that we can give people updates and where we're sitting and incorporate new, all the new ideas that we've had.